Hello, and welcome to another installment in our Egyptian history series. I'm Professor Ben Abitamarco, and joining me today is Dr. Thomas Cleary. So, what's your occupation, Dr. Cleary?
I'm the head of Roman history at Harvard University, and I have degrees in history and archaeology from Dartmouth University. It's good to be here, Ben.
Awesome. Today we'll be talking about the effect of Roman occupation in Egypt. Now, is there anything basic we should know?
Rome first gained major influence in Egypt when Julius Caesar came to Egypt after his defeat of Pompey during the Roman Civil War. Caesar started an affair with Cleopatra VII of Egypt that produced a child, Caesarion. And then when Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, his nephew Octavian took power and formed an alliance with the Roman general Mark Antony in order to avenge Caesar's death. But afterwards, they turned against each other.
So Octavian and Antony afterwards then split up Rome's territory, so that Octavian got the west and Antony got the east. Mark Antony then met Cleopatra, and they became lovers, and Antony began to give more and more power to Cleopatra. This enraged Octavian, and it led to a second Roman Civil War.
The Civil War eventually ended when Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide after their defeat at the disastrous Battle of Actium. With all opposition to his power gone, Octavian became the first emperor of Rome in 27 BC. In 30 BC, Egypt became an official Roman province.
As a Roman province, Egypt was administered by a provisional governor who was appointed by the emperor. The provisional governors were supported by 3 legions of Roman soldiers. Now what exports did Egypt provide for Rome?
Good question, Ben. Egypt was a big supplier of grain for the Romans and other parts of the Mediterranean. And the early colonial governors of Rome went about improving Egypt's agriculture by utilizing unused frontiers and improving Egypt's system of irrigation. Because of these reforms, Egypt had a century of prosperity. The Romans had a system of taxation placed on the Egyptians that promoted private ownership and entrepreneurs. However, there was very limited social mobility, and the majority of people worked as tenants on large plantations. What can you tell us about the social system, Ben?
Well, see, the social system in Egypt was no better or worse than it was under the Ptolemaic dynasty. The only real difference was that the Romans had a much better economic growth in Egypt. However, the Romans saw everyone in Egypt as Egyptian, and they did not distinguish between those who were ethnically Greek and those who were ethnically Egyptian, as the Ptolemaic rulers had done. This enraged the Egyptian people. What was the influence of Christianity on Egypt, Thomas?
Well, early on, as in Rome, Christianity spread fast in Egypt, which led to many of Egyptians' old temples that were made to worship both Egyptian and Roman pagan gods being destroyed or converted into places of worship for Christians. By the time the Roman Empire was split into East and West, most of the inhabitants of Egypt were Christian. After the empire was split up, Egypt became a province of the new Byzantine Empire, but it was soon conquered by the Persians and then by the Arabs. What evidence exists today of Roman's influence, Ben?
Today, there is only a very small influence of Rome in Egyptian territory. The only real evidence that Rome had control over Egypt are some scattered ruins throughout the country, which are dwarfed by the monuments left by the Greeks and Egyptians, such as the pyramids and the Sphinx.
So there is little evidence of Rome's influence over Egypt today?
Yes, since the main language of Egypt is Arabic, which has no common roots with Latin at all. The main religion of Egypt is Sunni Islam, which also has no influences from Roman culture. However, one notable indirect influence over Egypt is that Egypt's government is ruled by a president and parliament. This form of government can trace its roots back to the Roman Republic.
It's not surprising that Rome wouldn't have a lasting effect on Egypt, considering the country's long history before Rome and its history after Rome. The way Rome's rule of Egypt was a small event in the grand scheme of things.
Alright, that's all the time we have for today. This is Professor Ben Abitamarco
Signing off.